Hello and welcome. We start with the updates from West Africa. Russia has signed a strategic satellite deal with junta-led nations of Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso. As part of the deal, Russia will deploy telecommunications and remote sensing satellites above the three West African nations. The technology will boost border surveillance and national security in all three countries, which are facing a worsening Islamist insurgency. The agreement comes after ministers from the three countries met officials from Russia's aerospace agency Roscosmos in Mali's capital of Bamako on Monday. While the remote sensing satellite will monitor the border areas where militants are active, the telecom satellite aims to facilitate the broadcast of television and radio signals across the countries. It is also expected to provide internet and telephone services to inaccessible and underdeveloped areas. Apart from this, the ministers say that the satellites would help them to monitor and respond to floods, droughts, fires, and other emergencies. Officials have not provided a timeline for the launch of the satellites. However, as per reports, this partnership could be for an initial phase of 5 years. This partnership is the latest sign of Russia's expanding influence in the region. The military-led governments of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have turned their backs on the United States and other Western allies who were carrying their counter-terrorism operations in the region. The juntas have instead forged closer ties with Russia. Moscow has provided military instructors, helicopters, weapons, and now satellites to the armies to help them in their fight against terrorism. However, some analysts have raised doubts over Russia's ability to combat terrorism in West Africa. The region is reeling from Islamist insurgency linked to the Al-Qaeda and Islamic State for a decade. The armies took charge in Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso with a promise to curb the violence and turned to Russia for assistance. However, West Africa remains a hotspot for terrorism despite the Russian presence. As per reports, since the start of this year, there have been 224 attacks a month on average in the region. The violence has killed tens of thousands in the three nations. Just last week, Al-Qaeda affiliates killed at least 50 armed forces personnel in Mali's capital. This while Russia's Wagner mercenaries were stationed just kilometers away. The three junta nations, which formed their own alliance after withdrawing from the regional bloc ECOWAS, have hailed the Russian satellite pact crucial for their security strategy. Will Russia's latest move keep its edge over Western rivals in West Africa? Now, for more on this, we have with us Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow of Africa Programme at Chatham House think tank. And Paul is joining us live from London. Thank you for being with us.
Well,
what are the primary objectives of this satellite deal between Russia and these three West African countries?
Well, I think you have to look at it from both sides. From the point of view of the Sahelian military regimes, who, as you've explained, they've taken the decision, if you like, to break with the partnerships that before their countries used to rely on, both with their neighbors in fellow members of ECOWAS, as they were, and the partnerships with Western governments, with France, with the US in particular. Now, in deciding to break with those, they then needed an alternative, and it's come in the form of the troops, mainly from the Wagner Company, now known as the Africa Corps, the former mercenary outfit that seems to be now more closely controlled by the Russian defense establishment, if you like. And now with this satellite deal, they're trying to replace the technology that to some extent they have lost through the ending of their partnership, particularly with the US and France, because the US had a big security drones base in the north of Niger, from which it could really get a very good intelligence analysis of what was going on in the Sahara. And that information could be passed both to the French forces, but also to the forces of the Sahelian countries when it was working with them.
Yes.
And so that's what the Sahelian countries are looking for. But on the other hand, you also have the Russians who are looking for a means to extend their influence and to deepen that. One of the criticisms of the Russian approach has been that it's what Russia really offers is a security deal. And in the case of some countries like Burkina Faso, it's really just a regime protection deal. The Russians are not particularly involved in the battle against jihadist groups there, whereas they are in Mali. And there'd been a criticism, what are the Russians offering beyond security for the regimes? And in the case of Mali, the battle supporting the Malian army. And one dimension of this satellite thing, which is very shrewd, is this idea that it's going to extend television coverage, it's going to improve internet coverage. In other words, tangible things that the populations in those countries
Right.
will feel. So
Yeah.
that's how what's in it for Russia, if you like.
Yes. Right, Paul. I want to get onto that in a minute. In the context of the region's ongoing conflicts, how will the acquisition of these satellites impact the ongoing efforts to combat the Islamist insurgencies in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger?
Well, obviously, it'll provide some extra aerial intelligence, perhaps. But I think we need to remember these groups, whether we're talking about the Tuareg separatist groups in the north of Mali, who in late July inflicted a heavy defeat on the Wagner fighters and the Malian army, or whether we're talking about the Islamist groups, the jihadist groups that are moving around in the Sahel, or whether we're talking about community groups, because some of these conflicts have become overlapped, if you like, with long-standing conflicts over land, access to water and grazing and so on. This is very much, all these groups are operating as guerrilla groups, informally, with very light touch, very mobile, with motorbikes or small vehicles. So it's not clear how much what you might call high-level surveillance by satellites that may originally have been designed, if you like, to pick out big military installations, as we see when we see the coverage of, satellite photos of the battlefronts in Ukraine and so on. How applicable that will be to this very different context in the Sahara and in the Sahel, the arid, scrubby bushland to the south of the desert, where you're talking about often small groups of people moving in the lightest and hardest to detect way, and how far that will the satellites will then be complemented with the sort of drone operations that previously the French and the Americans were offering. That remains to be clear. We know that these Sahel states have been acquiring some drones, but how they will fit with the Russian satellite coverage isn't absolutely clear.
Sure. And going back to what you touched on earlier, what are the expected economic and social benefits for the local populations in these countries from this deal?
Well, where there is no internet coverage, where there's no access to TV, but I think internet's probably more important. Clearly, if the satellite systems, if the technology holds up well enough and they're able to deliver that, that will be an important plus in terms of people's day-to-day living quality. It will allow, for example, mobile banking and communication by WhatsApp and this sort of thing. But these it's not as if these countries are totally without modern telecoms already. All people generally, the usage of mobile phones, but even smartphones with WhatsApp and so on is already pretty high. So people have quite a wide degree of access to technology. So it's not absolutely clear what difference it will make. One of the things it may do, though, is bolster Russia's capacity to engage in the information war. The whole social media and media imaging battle that's going on, which is a battle for public opinion in these countries and for shaping perceptions of the outside world. That, of course, technology plays a really critical role in that. And it's an area where Russia's developed a lot of expertise. So whether the satellites will help that could be an important factor.
And how does this satellite deal align then with the broader geopolitical interest of Russia in Africa, particularly in this region?
Well, Russia had been several years, if you step back several years, in a position where it was really seemed to be trying to disrupt or cause a nuisance, if you like, to pattern regions where there was essentially a long tradition of partnership with the West. But it's moved on beyond that now. So now with these three central Sahelian countries, it is trying to actually build a zone of proactive influence. And clearly, the satellite deals are just another dimension, another aspect of what Russia is trying to do in building its partnerships with these countries. We're also seeing a big push on the cultural front, and obviously in terms of weapons supplies and so on. But what we don't yet know is how effective Russia will be on the development side of things, because these are countries that have had a very long-standing, deep development partnership, both with the UN system, but also with Western donors. For example, the largest financier of the Sahel food security early warning system is the European Union. So how Russia will fit with that will be a big challenge, but it also presents a challenge to those Western governments because they are very acutely aware that the Sahel is one of the poorest regions of the world, and they're anxious to retain relationships. They're anxious not to abandon development progress of recent years. And so at the moment, we're in a situation where a lot of the key Western donors are trying to maintain development support for the Sahelian countries to help ordinary people in rural communities and that sort of thing, while obviously having their political relations currently in the deep freeze.
Absolutely. Paul, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued insights on all the latest coming out of the Sahel region.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Bye.